It's a great pleasure today for me to introduce Professor Rössler, who's coming from Switzerland and Germany, to talk about a very relevant and intriguing theme: psychiatry in the movies, mirroring societal trends. When you proposed that, I was so excited, and then I went, yeah, well, there's something there, surely. So I started to look differently to the tele and movies, really, and I just assessed permanently how much there is psychiatric disorders in the cinema, how much the cinema would impact my belief of the world. So I started to be siding with your presentation months ago. And I watched again the very first movie shown by the Frères Lumière in the late 1890s, the train coming into the station. And what's interesting is the crowd panic that it induced. And that's only 120 years ago. Just a film, first time shown to a group of human beings, panic. There's something to do with psychiatry immediately there, I believe. Anyway, so there's so many things to explore back and forth between the visual narrative, the brain's organization around the visual system, psychiatry, changes in our society, changes in our treatment modality. So anyway, this is I think the challenge that we were going to address with Professor Rössler right now. You're a psychiatrist, psychologist, academic researcher, dozens of papers, medical director at the Kuschnach practice in Zurich, and professor at universities of Berlin and Sao Paulo. Most importantly to me, having looked at some of your papers, you are what I believe I like to call a brilliant outside-the-box thinker, which I believe is a really great skill in the job we're doing. So, having said all that, the floor is yours. Thank you so much to be with us today.
Okay,
thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for the introduction, for the kind introduction. Too much honor and too many papers, but this is the product of good co-workers. And that's the secret about research. You need good co-workers. So, well, the topic I've chosen, I've been occupied with for years, many years. And once you have started to look at movies, you always see something psychiatric going on in a way, or at least psychological going on. I mean, it's all about either love or death. That's what a movie is about, and this always has something to do with psychiatry. So, passcode, do I have to?
Shall we turn it off a little bit? Just advance the arrow.
Okay. Okay. So, but let me pass on the honors of being medical director to my colleague Konrad Hitz. I've been that before him, and he's now the medical director, and I'm on the board of Kuschnach Practice. And this is what the talk will be about. The question, do they mirror societal trends? And well, this has been or still is in the field of stigma research. And I've been in this field of stigma research, I think now for 30 years, doing various surveys, also some epidemiological work in stigma. And we just came out lately with a real big book which might interest you. It's called The Stigma of Mental Illness, End of the Story. All the people who are relevant in the field have published in this book. So this, if you really want to know something about the field, you just might get this book and find out. There has been a lot of research in stigma, which has been a reaction of the anti-psychiatric movement in the 60s and 70s, where naturally the people who were working in the field in a way tried to think about what has happened to this field. And I'll come back to this later. And naturally the attitude to psychiatry is also an expression toward that field. And you will see this in the movies as well. So, well, why are movies so popular? Well, they are creating participation. And well, I understand, and Dr. Neil Brenner was talking last year about psychiatry and theater. And so today we talk about psychiatry and the movies. And there are some communalities with theater, but only a few. I mean, as you know, it's dark. So you are a member of a group of people who sit there and have something in front of them where you are participating in. And this is really surprising. We are participating in what is happening on the stage. But there is the closeness. So, you know, for example, in the movies, you can really say to someone, I love you, you know. But if you're on the stage, you have to yell, I love you. You know, there is a difference between theater and movies. You can create closeness in the movies. You probably cannot create on the stage, but not in this way. It is always, not always, but a lot of time there is an underlying music which in special movies is created for these movies especially. So, you know, they always give you a feeling. They want to enhance the emotions which are presented in the movies. And you get this visual perception like cut, perspective, close-ups, etc. You know, sometimes you walk behind the people, sometimes people walk on you. And if you if you have started to look at the cuts, you see how many cuts there are in 1 minute. You always see these people from different perspectives, etc. And we do not notice that. We just are in the story. You know, and that's mostly surprising that we get engaged in what we see, but we do not see what this medium, the way the medium approaches us. So, very clear, movies create emotional involvement and empathetic resonance. I mean, we cry, we laugh. Men hate to laugh in the cinema, you know, they anyway like that a little bit, but it's you can't help it. I mean, you get involved empathetically, and we show other psychophysiological responses, possibly with sweat, you know, we get excited, you know, we have an increase of our heart rate, etc. So most of the time there is some emotional catharsis, but, and this is very important because this has always been under discussion, there is no induction of overt behavior. This means if we see a murder, we rarely go out and kill another person, you know. So it is and has been under discussion if it leads to imitation in a way, but not immediately, and this seems to be quite clear. Apart from the personal reaction, when we observe or see a movie, there are messages which are transported by this medium, and they do not only concern our individual involvement, they are some kind of reflection of societal values and messages. And this is what I want to discuss today with you today. And the question always will be, is this the hen or the egg? I mean, do movies only reflect what's up in a societal discussion, or do they create trends? I mean, this is something we can discuss later on together. So, but it is clear, filmmaking is a commercial enterprise, and they want to make money. And they make money because they want to, so they try to find out what is of interest, where do people engage in. And they might include inaccurate representations in their film to give the public what they want. And you know this slogan, if it bleeds, it leads. Violence, injury, death often ensure prominence of a story in both news and films. So, movies are somewhat like a seismograph of society. They are, and I'm convinced of that, conceptualized in a societal context. They react to societal environments, but they do not simply reflect the environment, but they offer interpretations of social reality. So it's an interaction of everyday life and cinematic products, what makes movies an important medium to reflect societal processes. And as such, movies are an important storage place for social knowledge. And I try to exemplify this on the basis of 4 movies where I will show you short trailers about it, and maybe you know the movies, but they are just a choice selected from hundreds and hundreds of movies in a way where psychiatry is involved as well. So, well, we start really early, and it was previously mentioned, I mean, that even from the beginning on, psychiatry was someone involved in movies from its beginning. And I wanted to point out a real famous movie, which is called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Wonder, how many of you know this? Okay. Yeah, some? Okay. It became, at its time, it became famous because of its unusual news style. There were, and you will see it later on, painted and built scenery, grotesquely distorted with contrasting light and painted light and shadow. And this was in the era of Expressionism, and as such, this is also a good example of Expressionist movies. The movie was prohibited under the Nazi rule and 1937 classified as degenerated art. So what is this story about? It's about Dr. Caligari's scientific interests are focused on somnambulists. You know, these people who wander around while they are asleep, who can be, and the question always has been, can you be motivated to action against your own nature? For example, killing people. This was what it was about. And this was Dr. Caligari, who had one person who was a somnambulist, and he abused this person to kill other people. But in the end, and it came as a surprise, in the end, the whole story is the delusional idea of a patient in a psychiatric ward. So this was a very surprising end, and there has been a lot of discussion about this end of the movie. So here you see some scenes from the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. You can easily recognize when I said these painted backgrounds like this, distorted, you know, like a walk hall or something like that. That's easily to recognize what I said before. And now let's try if it works, hopefully. You never know. Oh. How can I get it started? Ah, here we are. So is it? Yeah, right. So, and this was insofar interesting as after this movie came out, there have been so many articles on it, what the meaning is. And Siegfried Kracauer was a famous journalist and writer. He wrote an article from Caligari to Hitler. And he drew a parallel to the rise of the Nazi rule. And another one, the scriptwriter said that Dr. Caligari represents the authoritarian state, meaning the German Empire, while the somnambulist is a soldier ordered to kill during the First World War. And this is what the societal story is about. Can you bring people to do something against their will, or, you know, if you are in a state like what was later on called mass psychosis or something like this, you bring people to do something actually they do not want to. You know, and this has been after these unbelievable crimes the Nazis committed. This always has been under discussion. The question, how could it be possible that so many Germans participated in these crimes of the Nazis? And how do they hold responsible for that? Or how much do they take responsibility for that? And Krakauer was the one who said that the surprising twist of the story at the end of the movie, that after all, this was only the delusional idea of a patient who was telling this story to another patient, that this was an act of political repression which reverses actually the original intention of this movie. And there have been, indeed, other movies who, during the first half, before the Second World War, which all were occupied with this topic between the relationship of tyrants and slaves. And some of you might know, if you are fond of movies and old movies like Nosferatu, a very famous one, Metropolis, you know, like that one, Dr. Mabuse, or Fritz Lang, M. You know, they all dealt with the same question, you know, that there are tyrants in a way who bring people to do things against their will. So this is a very good example where a movie really reflects societal values and ideas. And each time produces its own psychiatry. Now, let me start in the mid of the last century, because there is when psychiatry really took up speed in the development, in meaning public development. And it was clear there were two main lines of reasoning. This was the group around Thomas Just. I mean, there are one or the others possibly, but I see many young people, and maybe not everybody knows those people, but Thomas Just was a famous person, a famous psychiatrist, and he took a very exposed position, arguing that mental illness is a myth. You know, it's not true. It does not exist. But there was another one who was more in the circles of experts. There was Thomas Scheff, for example, and he created this so-called labeling or social reaction theory, which hypothesized that in this case, a negative label given to certain individuals to explain deviant behavior promotes this kind of behavior, and as such becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there was a second line of reasoning. I mean, these are the first line who doubted the existence of mental illness in general. And the second line of reasoning was, for example, which was very popular, Lang in the UK, for example. I don't remember the title of his books. Neil, help me. Divide itself, right? The divide itself. You know, it was it had a lot to do with families and the interaction of families. And, you know, at this time there was also development in social psychiatry, empirical social psychiatry, Julian Leff, John Brown, and people like these who really were prominent in the 60s, who tried to underlie the importance of the family in the process of the onset of mental illness, etc. But this was Lang, but the one who even reached more international attention was Basaglia from Italy, you know, who blamed the society, in particular the family as a small unit of the society, who made people mentally ill. And, well, it fell in Italy on very fruitful grounds for a very simple reason, because the state of their mental hospitals was so desperate, you know, that everybody was aware that has to happen something. And he was the one who developed plans to deinstitutionalize people. Well, and one of his major acts has been, for example, that he tried to send back the mentally ill to the families, which did not please all families, as you might imagine, you know, at this time. But it was clear, and until today, I mean, there are still quite some romantic ideas about the Italian reforms. But on the other side, I mean, they promoted ideas at their time which are still popular, are picked up right now, which put the individual in the center of our focus, and this is not so common as you might think. This development has come around maybe about around the last 10, 20, 25 years or something like that. And this has been promoted in the Italian reforms before that. So it's clear that why has this been important? Because there is always an interaction between the developments in psychiatry and the society. And this means that they do not come out of the blue. Mental reforms, they always reflect what's going on in a society. And then there are reactions. If people tell you there are experts who promoted this or this is possible, but they only could do it on the background of societal developments. And this has been in Italy or UK, and this whole process of deinstitutionalization has been brought forward in the 60s and 70s and so on. So, and one of the center movies of that time has been One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, this has been an unbelievable, important movie concerning psychiatry, because it coined the idea what psychiatry is for decades. And I do remember, it was 1, 2, 3 years ago, I don't remember exactly, where I presented this movie. It were a group of a couple hundred teachers. And, well, I asked those people, who does not know One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? And there were maybe 450 people in the audience, and there were just about 3 who said they did not know the movie. But the longer the more, I'll come back to that later, younger people between 20 and 30 do not know this movie anymore. And so there is some time of forgiveness about this movie right now. But it was important, and I would try to give you, first, again, to introduce and try to remember what it is about. It was more or less like a chamber play. It was all done in one hospital in the US. It was a real psychiatric hospital where the movie was made, and almost everything, the whole play, the whole movie was in this one ward, right? As you remember. So, but I mean, it's clear. There was Jack Nicholson, and part of the success of this movie can be attributed to this ingenious actor, because he was really great in this movie. And you know, this is McMurphy, that is his name, and Chief Brompton, an Indian who did not speak, who was supposed to be deaf and could not speak anymore. And it was clear that it was about psychiatric treatment, and it was clear, like medication, electroconvulsive therapy, and at that time, still popular, lobotomy, you know. And some might know that the guy who invented lobotomy received the Nobel Prize for this. It was Lopez, some Spanish name. Probably Lopez, because every second name is Lopez. So this is what it, and there was the sadistic nurse Ratched. You know, Ratched, she received an award insofar as she, in the last century, belongs to the group of the most famous crooks in movies. That she's one of the 5, Ratched, you know. So I again try to, here we are.
His name is R.P. McMurphy. He's 38 years old. He's being confined.
So, And it's clear what this movie tried to express. Again, a repressive society which sanctions deviant behavior and normalizes all members of the society. The art director of this movie was Milos Forman, who just recently died a couple of weeks ago. And well, he came, Milos Forman came from, today we would say, Czech Republic. And so he was well aware of repressive systems, and he could make this movie with the blood of his heart, so to speak. So, and it was very clear that it stands in an anti-psychiatric tradition of Sass and Scheff. But what I really want to point out is, from a current standpoint, one can interpret this movie differently. That McMurphy fulfills all diagnostic criteria of a dissocial or antisocial personality disorder. So also he was characterized as a rebel against psychiatry, a rebel against this society, not adapted, not displaying normal behavior. But we should be aware. And when I show this movie today, and I'm giving classes on this topic, movies and psychiatry, no one notices that McMurphy was sentenced because of pedophilia. Yeah, because he had sexual intercourse with a 15-year-old girl, and the director of the hospital talked to him and said, well, this is in your records. And he said, well, doctor, if you had seen this pussy, you could not have resisted yourself. There was absolutely no insight in that, and honestly, today, this man would go to prison for that for quite a few years. And why was he admitted to the psychiatric ward? Because he was looking for entertainment in the psychiatric ward, because he thought it's too boring in the prison he was in before. So, and he exploits patients for his own purposes. They were playing cards all the time. And, he was winning all the time, and they lost all their little money. They lost cigarettes, etc., and so on. And it was clear. And at the end, when he wanted to escape, he exploited the night shift, the nurse who was on night shift. Also, it was clear that this person will lose his position. And Nurse Ratched, the 1 out of 5 biggest crooks in film history, protected the interest of the weak patients, because she said, I keep your cigarettes for you, and if you want a cigarette, come to me. So, but this was regarded at this time as an expression of how repressive this system is, and they cannot even decide when they want to smoke a cigarette. So it was clear, but it also had, and this is a new aspect from the Cuckoo's Nest as well, it also has some religious aspects, because it's almost like Jesus and his followers, because they were blindly following him, and at the end he was betrayed by one person. And he was betrayed by this young guy. When McMurphy tried to escape, he had, there was this one guy who was in the psychiatric ward because he was shy. So, and had never had a girlfriend, and this was a big problem for this young man, and he had never had any sexual contacts to a woman, and from which this young guy really suffered from, and he was stuttering. And when McMurphy tried to escape, he made his girlfriend came into the psychiatric ward, and then they wanted to escape together. But when he wanted to say goodbye to this young guy, he felt that he was really sad, and he said to his guy, well, you know what, take my girl. You can have my girl. I mean, what is the thing for itself? He sells his woman, or gave her away, it was very clear. So he said, but at least at this time, he seemed to be extremely generous, to share his girlfriend with other men. So this young guy obviously spend the night, and which was a disadvantage for McMurphy because they all were drunk and fell asleep and only wake up in the morning when everybody was already present in the psychiatric ward, so they couldn't escape. And they looked up where all the patients were, which most of them were more or less drunk and lying around somewhere, and this young guy was missing. And it was very clear that they searched for this young guy, and they found him in the one room with this young lady. And Nurse Ratched was really angry and annoyed about him. And she said, you know what, which was not a very nice move. She said to him, I will tell your mother. You know, and again, the cure has been the sexual act. Because the moment he had slept with this girl, he felt so free he didn't stutter anymore. So, but the moment Nurse Ratched looked at him, he started stuttering again. And she said, you tell me immediately who all made this happen here. And this was his betrayal. To escape from Ratched, he said, this has been McMurphy. So this has been the decline of McMurphy, because then he got treated again. This was the beginning of a story why they conducted a lobotomy on him later on. So it is clear that, I mean, it's a very intensive movie. It's still worth looking at, but once you get the opportunity to look at it, maybe you look at it from different perspectives as well. So, but this has been the 70s. Then the 80s and 90s, there was a turnaround in a way that it was, or still is, a decade of psychology. And that public perception is dominated by psychological interpretations of the individual. That means individuality prevails. And there is one slogan above everything saying, everybody can make it, even if you are schizophrenic. So there is a belief in personal strength, and you can see it if you go to a bookstore, at least in continental Europe. There are many bookstores at the train station, etc., and there are tables where they spread out books. And what do you see? Most of these books, most of these books are providing some kind of advice. They provide you with advice how you can become rich, beautiful, how you can get a girlfriend, how you can get the best position in your company, whatever. They give you the expression, it's only up to you. You only have to behave properly and you can make it. And before this background, I wanted to introduce the next movie, which is A Beautiful Mind. And I assume many of you are aware of this movie, A Beautiful Mind. It's about John Nash, the Nobel Prize winner, John Nash, who received the Nobel Prize for Economics. Because, by the way, before he turned schizophrenic, he developed some game theory, which was very important for the development of economics, and this is what he got awarded for. Again, an ingenious actor like Russell Crowe. He was the crazy professor, and you know, they made this movie in a way which has only little to do with schizophrenia, so to speak. They just to make the movie work, you know, he had always fantasy companions in this movie, which was supposed to be the expression of his schizophrenic ideas, because these people talked to him all the time, and he felt persecuted, and in times he always thought he was part of the FBI, the Secret Service in the US, and he worked for the Secret Services. So, and by the way, today I would give him a different diagnosis. I'm sure he was bipolar. as well, you know, but this is not really important. You see he has gone through real bad times. I mean, psychiatry has not even been the worst part of his life, but it was very clear that medication suppressed his creativity. That's what he felt, and in times he was on and off medication, and he relapsed quite often, etc., etc. And he had always his wife on his side. In reality, they got divorced, but they got remarried later on again, and tragically it was, I always lose track of time, I would say it's about a year ago, he died in a car accident, and together with his wife. So, again, let me see, just to give you an impression. When it came out, and I do remember was surrounded by very few people around me, and there is an ingenious plot, because this plot is divided by half. Because the first half of the movie, you've got the impression this is not about psychiatry or whatever, it is more like a thriller, you know? That's the idea. Well, that's really something you get to because you were really in that story. And in that sense, it was really well made, this movie, because as you became part of the delusional world of Russell Crowe, of John Nash in this movie, and you were convinced that this all happened as it was described. And there was this one, the cut right in the half of the movie when he was presenting his speech, and again he felt himself surrounded by other secret agents from other countries, and he ran away, and they overwhelmed him, they followed him and overwhelmed him, and one was over him, and you saw this perspective from down under, and he said, I'm Dr. Sowieso, you know. He said, so it was clear, it was not an agent, it was a psychiatrist, a doctor, who was called because he was talking very strangely and behaving very strangely, etc. And the second part is the psychiatric story of John Nash, you know, but the first part, it was really like an agent thriller, you know, very impressive and well made. And again, but there are other messages to it, and you have to know that this whole thing played in the 50s of the last century in the US, and this was part of the McCarthy era. The McCarthy era was a paranoid era about communism or communists in the United States, and there were thousands and thousands of people who had to declare themselves as being non-communist, etc. And there were many people who lost their employment because of they were suspected to be communists. And this was very prominent among actors at that time as well, who never got another role in other movies again. And so there was a paranoid atmosphere in the US in the 50s with McCarthy. McCarthy has been a senator in the United States. But it is very clear that what was shown in this movie is not a realistic depiction of schizophrenia. And there were quite rational considerations which taught John Nash to cope with his illness. I told you there were these companions he had who were talking to him. And after some time he realized that his companions, and there was one little girl, she didn't grow older. And he said, well, come on, I must be crazy. I mean, I know you for years and you don't become older, you know? I mean, this is a consideration a schizophrenic person never would make. I mean, that's crazy. You know, so, pardon?
So you laugh, you're making fun of a commonly held belief that schizophrenia, that people can talk to them. And it's working well in this country. I find more aware of you as well.
Yeah, well, I know why they did it, you know, but it's not, if you come from the side of psychiatry, you feel, well, this is not schizophrenia. This is not what we see when we meet patients, you know. But you ask an important question, we'll have time to discuss that, you make an important statement in so far. Should we, I mean, is it what we want to have a realistic depiction of a mental disorder, or do we want to give the people what they want? I mean, that's an important question in the movies, where we can follow that on, okay? And it was clear that there was a heavy burden on his family, a very heavy burden. And this is what I said, this was the fear of communism in the 50s, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism included as well. So, but the message of the movie is, and you see, he really struggles with his illness, etc., and he gets a decent position, you know, he gets nice colleagues who allow him to continue teaching at Harvard, I think it was what he did, and it was a very moving scene, you know, when this guy from the Nobel Prize Committee came and told him that he's going to receive the Nobel Prize, and then all his colleagues came and gave him their pencils, you know, which was a sign of admiration for his work. So, but it is clear, again, the message is, in a time, in an era of psychology and the idea everybody can make it, even if you are schizophrenic, and you can make it even without medication. And this has been his, what he wanted to do. He wanted to live his illness without medication. And again, it was the love of his wife, which is the most important thing, which carries you through life. In reality, they got divorced. So, but these were the message. So again, there are, in recent years, Asperger autism has become very, very popular, which has not been in the focus of the public prior to the last years, etc., but it became more popular because there was always some admiration to in particular the Asperger autism. And there is one person, one outstanding person, which is Temple Grandin. I mean, that's her real name, that's Temple Grandin. That's a woman who, well, suffered from childhood autism and had a mother who was really caring about her and trying to educate her to speech. And you know, the way teachers and autists communicate, the sign, you know that, look in my eyes. You know, that's always what you get taught, look in my eyes, etc. And it was very clear, and it's very touching again, an ingenious actor. Help me with her name. Yeah, Claire Danes, right? And you would, I mean, surprised what changes she can make through, and the way she's presenting, she's really ingenious in this. And again, this is a very touching movie. And let's see if we...
My name is Temple Grandin.
He is the Temple Grandin. In reality, became a professor, veterinarian professor. I don't know, somewhere in the Middle West, and she revolutionized the slaughterhouses for cattle. You know, in a way, she was a very visual thinker. She translated everything in a vision. She tried, and she observed. You know, if you make walk the cattle in circles, you know, they don't become anxious. And it was a very difficult time to convince the people who were running slaughterhouses and people who were designing slaughterhouses. So she fell out of the time. It became clear at one point of the time she had convinced someone to build slaughterhouses in different ways, and she became really famous for that and is widely admired for her work, which she did with... she was not a vegetarian, by the way, but... it was clear that she has achieved something really extremely special. And it promotes the idea, again, that if you try, you can do everything, you know. you can manage your life. Even a person with childhood autism even can be a professor if you're talented. And then disadvantages turn into advantages, but parents have to try hard. And this means mainly mothers have to try hard. You know, you have to do everything for your child, something like that. And this reflects the current political situation in many Western countries, telling you, you know, taking you out of a context and always presenting the idea, everybody can make it, you know. And this is definitely not true. Not everybody can make it. You need the right education, etc., etc. But again, they give you an idea, you know, if you don't make it, it's your fault because you didn't try hard enough. And this is something what you can read over and over again today, you know, try hard. You can do it. You know, you can reach everything in your life only if you try it. A last point I wanted to mention is the portrayal of physicians in the movies, because it's also a field of projection. We all, the therapists, etc., are affected from this because the cinematic depictions of physicians can affect the public expectation of what a doctor or therapist can or has to do. And there are various analyses about that, like movie physicians are mostly or commonly surgeons, or psychiatrists, or family practitioners. But you see, if you take the scope of physicians, you know, psychiatrists always take a prominent place in the list. And surprisingly, physicians were portrayed negatively in 44% of the movies, and since the 60s, positive portrayals declined while negative portrayals increased. And how are they depicted? As greedy, egoistical, uncaring, unethical, especially in recent films. And medical inaccuracies occurred in 27% of the films. This is very common what movies are about, you know. This is stories about doctors, you know, what people say, all doctors are crooks about my doctor, except my doctor, you know. Because they have a personal relationship and they feel very differently about a person they are related to very closely, but they have the general idea they are crooks, you know. So. And in particular in American movies, surprisingly, most psychiatrists are male, and they look mostly like Freud. They are middle-aged on average, yeah. They are friendly, but, and this is the most common topic in these movies, there are boundary violations. In many movies there are sexual violations, and in movies preferably women. I mean, this meaning that women, female psychiatrists, fall in love with their male patient. So see, I mean, this is a fantasy of man, you know, and this is clear. Even so, if you describe psychiatrists, they are mostly men. But if it goes about when it is about love, you know, there are a preponderance of women in these movies. And again, I mean, what I said before, a central topic of these movies is love cures. And honestly, I mean, to have a good relationship with your patients is a very significant mean for success of a therapy. I mean, it always means how far you would go, but it is clear that in many of these movies, they fall in love with each other and they lived happily ever after. But there are always many psychiatrists which are incompetent, and it mostly what in the majority is presented is individual therapy, even on the couch. So give you an idea, because this is always in the cartoons, they like it, you know, like you see always a couch presented. So you see on the left, I'm under a lot of pressure at work, you know, this tire, for example, or I in particular like this one. You must be the 10th doctor who's told me I'm suffering from paranoia. What is this? Some kind of conspiracy? And see, here's a sex puppy. Men always want the same from me, you know. So you see, but this is a very popular topic for cartoon psychiatrists, and it's always the same relationship having, I mean, how many of you are psychoanalytically oriented and have your patients lying on a couch? There anyone in the room? Not one. Okay. Okay, but you see, I mean, this is what coins the idea of the public, what psychotherapy is today. And they just show you some of the movies. I mean, like, you probably some of you have seen the real funny movies like Anger Management, for example. That's a real mean psychiatrist, really. Or Analyze This with Robert De Niro and Billy Crystal, you know, this is Robert De Niro is the mafia boss, you know, and he orders a therapy, you know, and this poor guy, you know, he gets involved in all the criminal activities of his patient, you know. It's a real funny movie, but again, there are messages behind, you know, like the Fool Doctor and things like that, which always are transported here as well. And there's one I wanted also to show you, a dangerous method. It depicts on one side the relationship with Carl Gustav Jung and Freud on one side, and it also depicts the relationship of Jung with one of his patients, Spiel an der Spielrein. And they had, in truth, they had a long-lasting relationship, and so I show you the trailer from this, and I also show it because this is my hospital. And to tell you in parentheses, you know, when they made this movie, they came to us, to the Burg Hölzli, and they said, could we rent this? You know, because they wanted to make the movies in the buildings of the Burg Hölzli. So they were not aware that this is today a hospital for acute patients, and where each year are 4,000 patients treated, and about 250 beds, etc., so on. So I show you. Not a very easygoing person. He had worked in the hospital for 10 years, and he had to leave the hospital because of his affair with Anna Spielrein. Well, this didn't break his reputation for whatever reasons, but at this time, in the beginning of the 20th century, there were no rules if there were a relationship between patient and doctors, etc. But however you look at it, it was a scandal at its time, and it was very clear. But again, it was a love story as well behind. And in this case, Jung was more or less the crook in this story, as he didn't want to leave his wife, who was quite wealthy, and supporting him to live a very decent life in Zurich, which everybody knows is a very expensive place to live to, so it's good to have a wealthy wife on your side in this case. And Anna Spielrein, who was Jewish, was killed by the Nazis in Russia later on in her life, but she became a psychoanalyst herself. She studied medicine at the University of Zurich. I mean, this is a true story. This all happened. And after all, it is very clear what it is about. I mean, it tells a story more in the foreground with Freud and Jung. that they were very different, used very different approaches, and by today we know that Carl Gustav Jung, he had quite many delusional ideas, and a couple of years ago his diary, the Red Book, has been published as a big book which is full of psychotic thoughts and paintings which were secret at that time. But he suffered in a way, but had something what we call today exceptional experiences, things like that. So, but anyway, he's up to today. Carl Gustav Jung is probably on the side of Freud the most popular psychologist in the world, still is, etc. And it did not ruin his reputation, but again it was a love story, you know, an ongoing story, you know, which seemed to be productive. And again, Keira Knightley got cured by love. You know, it was her most important driver to get better. Well, I published a book on the Burghölzli. Burghölzli, if you translate it, means castle from wood, etc. And there are many nice pictures on it anyway. So I think that has been it so far, and we have still some minutes to discuss, and thank you for your attention. So any comments or accusations or interpretations? Neil, please go ahead.
It looks very interesting presentation. You asked a question right at the beginning of your talk about whether film. Sorry, you asked at the beginning of your presentation whether film, as it were, reflects society or does it lead society? And I was thinking while listening to that the actual nearest analogy that comes out of this is not theatre, but actually opera. In the 19th century, opera was the most popular art form, far more than theatre in many ways, was the popular art form, and actually had an influence on society because of its popularity, and also reflecting it, and reflected the developments of mental illness, the beliefs of mental illness from the early 19th century of the miasma theory all the way through to the large institutions of the late 19th century. And it seems that Dr. Caligari's Cabinet particularly is a very important film because it filled people's fear with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I think the two are very similar in many ways, of incarceration, which was a reflection of society's fear about psychiatry, that psychiatrists incarcerated people and controlled people, whatever method. And normal people could be incarcerated in a psychiatric hospital, which is, of course, what happened in the late 19th century through into the early 20th century. Women who've fallen pregnant outside marriage would be incarcerated. And I think this fed into the fear and his reflection. And I think a lot of people still find the thought of watching Dr. Caligari's Cabinet very disturbing. So I think the debate of the chicken and egg question is a fundamental one on film as much as an opera.
Okay, well thanks, Neil. Well, I do agree, but I take from your words that you also are not still decided. What was first, the hen or the egg?
I think in opera, it's easier to say that it was a reflection of society. It was the nearest you could get to the Daily Mirror, rather than as an influence.
Okay. It reminds me of Werner Herzog on the opera. What was it? In Brazil, you know, this Werner.
The Amazon.
Yeah. And this crazy actor, what's his name?
Klaus Kinski.
Yeah, Klaus Kinski. Right. I mean, he was really crazy, by the way. Yeah, I mean, it was also about opera and things, you know. Well, this is true, but I mean, like, what do you say? I mean, let's take the Cuckoo's Nest. It's clear it reflected society. It only could become popular at its time, not only because it was so well made, but also because because people said that's exactly what psychiatry is about.
It also very much influenced people's views on ECT.
Right.
And still to this day, I don't know if other people, patients will say, you're not going to give me ECT like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I still get that.
Yeah.
Quite common.
Yeah. Well, you British, you are not easily to influence. You still do it. I mean, I know. Well, and it's effective. I mean, it's, yeah. Yes, please.
I wonder if you could talk about as well how the film industry plays this role as well that we can all play, of denying that mental health actually exists. So long as there is there's a bad psychiatrist that locks you up, or a government that is wrong, then we can just pretend that actually I wasn't really unwell. I'm hearing voices. It was just, wrong, the nasty man, or the wrong political ideation, or whatever else. How much of this is the movie industry helping us fantasize that love will conquer all?
Yeah, well, that's what it is exactly about. See, for example, the last one, The Dangerous Method, with Keira Knightley representing Spielrein. And in the film industry, they are always looking for clear reasons why someone might have a mental problem. So, and this I find very interesting because during the last, let's say, 15, 20 years, the question of trauma has become so popular. And this is how film industry interacts with society. Society impacts on psychiatric or psychological research. So the idea of trauma causing mental problems has become very popular. I assume that almost everybody in this room will be convinced that trauma is a major driver of mental problems, right? But this has not been clear, let's say, at least among experts, 20 years ago. I do remember conferences when you raised the question if schizophrenia, the onset of schizophrenia, might be caused also by traumatic events, you got laughed at. It was out of discussion. It was very clear. It was the idea, something like what we call the cannonball model of mental illness. This is just the expression of your genes. That's it. And it comes, there is an onset at some time, and the illness takes its course. So, and this is very different how we look even at severe illnesses like schizophrenia today, where we would say there is a certain kind of vulnerability, but it always needs a certain environment to express the illness itself. And I'm personally really undecided because let's take, for example, the research in the United States, where public funding is very, very important. And if you are a researcher in the US, you do not just research what you are interested in, you research what might interest the public or the funders, the funders. But these funders are interested because they are not experts. They are people, they represent the people. So you have better chances to get funding for popular ideas, So, and this is how things go along and how the hen and the egg interact all the time. When you invest a lot of money, you get results. And if you invest money in popular ideas, naturally you get more results on, yeah? So if you look, for example, in the American Journal of Psychiatry, you find many, many publications on trauma, which would not have made it under, let's say, just under strict consideration of quality, but they're interesting. You know, that's why they are published quite often, you know? So, see, this is, well, I'm not finally decided how it works, I don't know, you know, but it seems that everything interacts with everything, and that we do not independent research, and that we all are influenced by popular ideas, and so on, you know. But on the other side, there's always this brain story, and this is very interesting insofar as the brain research in the 90s, some of you might remember, it was the decade of the brain, the 90s, and after 99, they claimed now it's followed by the century of the brain. So, you know, it's not only you don't have to hurry up, you have the rest of the 21st century to go on with brain research. But today we have come to a point as well where the simple idea, you know, that genes determine your life or the brain determines your life, you know, it is very clear today that everything is an expression, even the genes are expressed in certain environments. You know, you always need to live in a certain environment that a certain behavior in a way expresses itself. And this, I would say, is if you try to characterize the current state of research, is where we stand, you know. And I'm always looking for movies and thinking, okay, let's look what are the newest developments I don't know about. When applying for research money or something like that, you know, we better look at the newest movies, you know, where you find what's really new, what's interesting. And they are, and maybe at this conference it would have been a good idea also to have shown some movies on addiction. And again, also addiction is always, in most movies, it's always a very personal thing. It's always a very thing of your personal strength, if you make it or not. You know, and this is very clear in this age. Why? It's not. It's not. We have had about 150 years where alcohol has destroyed whole societies, you know, and it was not by chance who got alcoholic, because it was clear that it were the lower classes who, you know, who got involved in drinking, etc., etc. You know. So, but again, up to today, it is more the idea. It's your personal exclusively your personal responsibility if you get dependent or not, you know? So this societal aspect, which was so important 30, 40 years ago, why we get mental problems in a wider sense or something like this has completely gone currently, you know? It's not of great interest. It's also, and I find, you know, this pendulum which swung over to this focus on individuality, I mean, it has some advantages, but also many disadvantages. Because honestly, you know, not everybody becomes beautiful if you read a book, you know, and not everybody gets a girlfriend or boyfriend if you read a book, you know? Yeah, right, you know. Yeah, you can buy the power, right? And if you don't read this book, you know, it's your fault anyway. But if you read the book and you don't make it, then it's your. You have to read another one, right? There might be a better one, yeah. But it's always your responsibility if you make it, you know. Yes, please.
Thinking from your personal opinion, whether the movie industry is trivializing mental illness and debasing psychiatry.
Yes, I mean, in a way it is, you know, but whom could we blame for that? You know, I mean, this is, on one side, we should be thankful that obviously the movie industry is centered around our basic problems, So this is where the interest in our profession comes from, for which we should be thankful in a way, because there are many people who, you know, and but what comes from the industry, for example, also is the idea that a psychological or psychiatric therapist, you know, can cure you in a way as a surgeon does it. Yeah, something like that. I mean, if you look, there are many of the cartoons which look at a therapist or a psychiatrist like a radiologist, a mental radiologist. We look through people, you know, we can look in their inner side, you know. I mean, you know that all. When you meet people you don't know before, they ask you, what are you doing, etc., whatever you say, and their response quite often is, oh, now I have to be careful. Yeah. What I tell you, right? That's a very common reaction to it, you know. So, please, you.
Yeah. What I particularly have a problem with is that the movie industry, music industry, will have a certain skewed view of addiction, where the movies were mostly inner city minorities, drug addict on the corner, which therefore would skew people's opinions of what addiction is, what it looks like, okay? So therefore, the policies of policing, everything was geared towards those communities. Mm-hmm. But now I treat opiate addiction in Nashville, Tennessee. 98% of my patients are Caucasian, okay? And you say, well, how did that happen if the movies has a view of addiction that looks very different, or the music? And that's because these communities were maybe targeted by clinical professionals overriding pills, but that's not addiction, right? Yeah, right. Oh, it's the crack addict down in the ghetto. Okay, we focus on them. Mm. But the rural communities, other pockets of communities, were kind of left alone because, oh, they're not addicts. You know, it's okay if you get 120 Oxycontin tablets for the month because your doctor wrote it. Oh, he stopped writing it. Oh, now you have this middle-aged Caucasian lady now having to sneak and get pills because she's going through withdrawal. Eventually, she's losing everything. Now she's snorting heroin. But that's not what you're going to see in the movies. Mm. You're not going to see that. Mm. Okay. Okay. Exactly. Yeah.
Too scary.
Yeah, and to me, if you said the reflection of society versus what the movies are then feeding back on, which comes first, the hen, I think when they begin to make movies where you see more of a more diverse, broader spectrum of mental illness, of addiction, that's really reflective of what's actually going on. Okay, because right now I don't see that. Not from, I'm based right in the middle of the city of Nashville, okay? I'm not saying that there isn't drugs and addiction in the minority communities, but I'm saying that's not what you see in the films. On TV, is that my patient population does not look like that. Yeah. It really doesn't. Maybe minorities don't seek medical treatment as often, okay, which is also another part of it. You know, they won't come in for the help. But then on the back end, they were undertreated for pain anyway, so they never got hooked on the pills because they never got prescribed them. Okay, because they wouldn't give it to them, okay? But, so I look at maybe media a little bit differently, because being an African-American woman, but in addiction care, I mean, it's like they walk through the door. If you looked at my waiting room, it's full. But the physician is me. The patients are people who don't look like me. But I treat everybody the same. I love everybody. But they're even shocked because even in their minds, they see the contrast is flipped. Mm. And they even ask me, my patients, how do you feel about this? And I say, well, until the media, the movie catches up, I will treat patients and hopefully people will get better, and that's what counts.
Okay. Well, what you're talking about is something we know from Stigma research, that we usually divide up between what we call prejudice and discrimination. These are two different things. Prejudice is something where we at least would say people have preformed ideas about things, which not necessarily need to be wrong, by the way, you know? I mean, could be right, but what we expect usually, if you're confronted with what you are prejudiced on, you have to make a reality check, something like that. But most people react in a different way. They react in a discriminatory way, as far as they say, you know, if this is true, I get scared, and I don't want to have anything to do with these people. You know, that's what happens. That's a reaction to prejudice very often, and you are right. And well, I'm not sure if people really want to know about addiction. I mean, if you, at least of continental Europe, I don't know the figures in the UK, but in continental Europe, about 80% of the population drink alcohol, you know. And so you are the alien if you don't drink alcohol, at least. You know. You wanted to make a comment?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Declan. I thought of this when she was speaking. The film Requiem for a Dream does actually depict an older white woman who's prescribed something, right? But for every one Requiem for a Dream, there's 100 Hustle and Flows, right?
Right, exactly.
Exactly. So I feel you. And I feel like there's just something really important here too about the production and the culture it comes from. I noticed recently a friend of mine, a writer-director, made a film called La Fête est finie. It's the party is over in English. It's a French film financed by the state. It's a true story based on her own experience. And I was with her. We were doing like a panel about the movie afterwards and listening to the audience's reactions. And it was so interesting to hear, like, the people were so defensive. They had identified so much with her character that they were upset with the treatment center professionals for having enforced the rules and boundaries, right? And it was just so interesting because it wasn't what she meant at all. And when they asked her about it, she said, no, these people saved my life. You got the wrong idea. That's not what I meant to say. But that's how the people were reacting. I think because she had done a great job as a storyteller and they identified with her character. And that's what story is about, right? To be able to identify and to measure our lives against the story. And sometimes when we do that, our own projections get in the way, right? I don't know. I'm just very interested in that idea.
Well, this is what we expect from movies, to be able to identify, you know? We want to have relief when we get out, you know? Great story, wonderful, you know? Okay, I think we are almost through. If there would be a last comment. Oh, here.
Yeah,
Yes,
where
please.
did you put Gaslight and the history of movies around Caligari?
That you have to translate to me. What do you mean by...
Okay, well, the plot's really very simple. Is that the partner tries to make his wife, his partner thinks she's going crazy by creating symptoms of auditory hallucinations and also visual ones. He keeps turning the gas down. This is really unfortunate for the rather unsubtle sort of getting the
Yeah.
but gaslighting, I think, has become a name in psychology.
I see, okay. Okay, thank you, I didn't know that. Well, actually that's interesting because there are different types of regularly clients, patients depicted in the movies. And one is the rebel, for example, you know. There is the real madman who is dangerous, which is quite frequent too. And there's one other personality which would say the patient is right. What's, you know, I mean, after all, it comes out, the whole story, so that, that at the end, you know, the strange story these people tell is right, it's correct.
whose whole film is whose whole life is a movie?
Yeah. No, I meant another one who's K-Pax or something like that. You know, he gets admitted to a psychiatric ward and he's telling strange things, and you know, which are clearly delusional, and he gets involved with his psychiatrist, and at the end of the movie this guy disappears out of the closed ward and no one knows, and you know, it's insinuated that, you know, this alien has gone back to his star, you know, that's and this is something that always comes up in psychiatry, that people get treated although they are right.
Caligari,
yeah.
Gaslighting was actually a play, as was the beautiful, not the mind, the Freud play was being originally started as plays that failed.
Okay.
And they were taken up as movies. The Christopher Hampton play was originally called The Talking Cure.
Okay.
And did really badly in London, closed very quickly.
Okay.
And was being hawked around for years to turn into a film, and eventually did, mainly because Keira Knightley wanted the role.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your patience. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.